She gave everything to raise her only son, but when he left for college, she faced a haunting silence and a question no one had ever asked her. Who was she without him? Set in the heart of Nairobi, this is the inspiring story of a woman who rediscovers herself through hiking trails, library benches, and the power of unexpected friendship. Don't miss this quiet yet powerful journey of rebirth. The morning sun filtered softly through the gauzy curtains in Miriam's two-bedroom flat in Kilimani, Nairobi. The living room, usually filled with the warm chatter between mother and son, felt unusually silent. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway, some labeled books, others clothes, and one simply said, "Home?" with a question mark scribbled in Daniel's handwriting. Miriam stood in the kitchen, pouring tea into 2 mugs. Her fingers trembled slightly, and not from the heat. Today, her son was leaving for university in Eldoret, nearly 5 hours away. Daniel had earned a scholarship to study mechanical engineering, and Miriam had never been prouder. She'd spent the last 18 years pouring every ounce of her energy into raising him, working as an admin at a local NGO, taking evening shifts when money got tight, and skipping holidays so she could afford new textbooks or a better laptop. But now that the moment was here, pride fought against a heavy ache in her chest. "Mama, are you okay?" Daniel's voice cut through her thoughts. He stood by the doorway, taller than her now, dressed in jeans and a button-down shirt she had ironed the night before. "I'm fine, just tired," she replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Did you pack the blanket? Eldoret gets cold." He grinned. "Yes, Mama. You made me pack it twice." They sat in silence for a while, sipping their tea. Outside, the taxi honked, a sharp, impatient sound that reminded Miriam this was no dream. Daniel hugged her tightly. "You've done everything for me, Mama. I'll call you every day." "Don't call every day," she said, forcing a laugh. "You're starting a new chapter. Live it." But when he finally left, the door clicking shut behind him, Miriam sank into the sofa, her hands limp on her lap. The silence was no longer gentle. It was oppressive. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, she was alone. No one to cook for, no one to remind about homework, no school meetings, no teenage messes, just her and a hollow, echoing quiet. The first few days without Daniel felt like wandering through a fog. Miriam moved through the apartment like a visitor in someone else's home. The routines that once structured her days had collapsed into a disorienting quiet. She still woke up at 5:30 a.m. out of habit, preparing breakfast for no one. The sound of only one plate clinking in the sink made the loneliness sharper. On the 3rd morning, she caught herself calling out, "Daniel, you'll be late for class," before realizing there was no one to answer. She chuckled dryly, then sank into the armchair by the window, cradling her tea and staring at the jacaranda tree outside. Its purple blossoms had begun to fall, carpeting the pavement like confetti after a party. But there was no celebration in her heart. Miriam had never really built a life for herself outside of being a mother. She and her husband, James, had been orphans, finding solace in each other as teenagers in a church youth group. They married young, full of dreams, but short on money. And when James passed away in a matatu accident just before Daniel turned 5, Miriam had buried her grief in survival. Her life became a steady cycle: work, raise her son, save. No time for hobbies, no close friends, no family reunions, just the 2 of them against the world. And now, it was just her. The evenings were the hardest. That was when Daniel used to sprawl across the living room floor, headphones in, watching football highlights or asking her to make his favorite ugali and sukuma. Now, the only noise was the distant honk of traffic and the occasional hum of the fridge. She tried watching TV, but every program felt hollow. She even opened a novel she had once promised herself she'd read someday, but the words wouldn't hold her attention. One evening, as she stared at Daniel's empty room, his posters still on the wall, his cologne still faintly in the air, Miriam felt a rising panic. What was the point of her life now? Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Mama, I miss you. Hope you're okay. Please take care of yourself. Promise?" She blinked back tears. Something had to change. It was a Sunday afternoon when Daniel called, not just a message, but a full video call. Miriam had been dusting the bookshelf, not because it needed cleaning, but because she needed something to do. She hesitated before answering, smoothing her headscarf and wiping her hands on her Kitenge skirt. Daniel's face filled the screen, framed by the blank walls of his hostel room. He looked tired, but happy, and his smile was instant the moment he saw her. "Hi, Mama," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You look busy?" Miriam laughed softly. "Dusting books I haven't read in years. I suppose that counts." Daniel tilted his head, observing her. "Mama, how are you really doing?" She tried to brush the question aside with a wave of her hand. "You don't need to worry about me. I'm just adjusting. It's quiet, yes, but I'll get used to it." He didn't look convinced. "You've been everything to me all my life. You've done it alone, with so much strength. But now that I'm here, I want to know that you're doing things for you, not just waiting for my calls." Miriam's lips quivered. She had always hidden her emotions well, like a woman wearing armor. But her son, her grown, observant son, was gently peeling it away. "I don't know how to be anything else," she confessed. "I don't know what to do with this time, with this space." There was a pause. Then Daniel leaned closer to the camera. "There's no shame in starting over, Mama. There's this club at my university called the Outdoor Explorers. It made me think, don't we have something like that back in Nairobi? You used to love walking to Uhuru Park when I was little." Miriam smiled faintly. "That was a long time ago. But maybe you could start again. There are groups, clubs, even things at the local library. I checked online. Some of them do nature walks, book clubs, city tours for adults." She stared at him. He had done research for her. "Join one," he said gently. "Not for me, for you." Miriam didn't answer right away. But that night, she opened her laptop and typed "Social Activities for Adults Nairobi" into the search bar. At the top of the list, Nairobi Public Library, Social Programs and Hiking Group, ages 40+. She clicked. The Nairobi Public Library on Banda Street had always been there, its colonial architecture standing quietly amidst the city's evolving skyline. Miriam had passed it many times on her way to work, but had never gone inside. Now, clutching her handbag like a shield and wearing her best floral blouse, she stood hesitating outside the large wooden doors. "Just go in," she whispered to herself. Inside, the library smelled of old paper and wood polish, a scent that oddly calmed her. The front desk was staffed by a cheerful woman in her 30s who welcomed her with a nod. "Karibu, are you looking for a particular book?" "Actually," Miriam said, clearing her throat, "I saw something online. About social activities?" "Ah, you'll want to check the community board near the reading garden," the woman replied, gesturing to the left. Miriam followed the direction and came to a brightly colored bulletin board pinned with posters and flyers. There were reading clubs, poetry nights, and there it was, Silver Steps, Travel and Hiking Club, 40+, rediscover nature, one trail at a time. The next hike was scheduled for Sunday, starting at Karura Forest. She jotted down the number and took a photo with her phone. As she turned to leave, she noticed a few women sitting in the courtyard, chatting softly over tea and books. They looked around her age, some laughing, others simply enjoying the shade of the tree that arched over their circle. The sight stirred something deep inside her, a longing for connection, not just with others, but with herself. That evening, after rereading the flyer 3 times, Miriam dialed the number. "Hello, this is Clara," a warm voice answered. "You're interested in joining Silver Steps?" "Yes," Miriam replied, her voice unsure but steady. "I'd like to try the hike on Sunday." Clara beamed on the other end of the line. "You'll love it. We're a small, welcoming group. No pressure, no experience needed. Just bring comfortable shoes and an open heart." Miriam smiled. For the first time in weeks, her chest felt a little lighter. She looked over at her packed bookshelf. Maybe, after the hike, she'd borrow a book, just for herself. Sunday came faster than expected. Miriam stood at the entrance of Karura Forest, feeling both nervous and foolish. She had worn her most comfortable sneakers, shoes she hadn't used in years, and packed a bottle of water and a banana into her backpack. Around her, a modest group of people gathered, chatting easily and adjusting their sun hats. Then she spotted a woman, waving enthusiastically in her direction. "You must be Miriam." Clara was about Miriam's age, dressed in breathable hiking gear and a contagious smile. She had kind eyes that immediately put Miriam at ease. "Come, let me introduce you to the others," she said. The group was a delightful mix of middle-aged professionals, retirees, and widowed women like herself. They greeted Miriam with warm welcomes, no awkward questions or pitying looks, just genuine interest. One woman, Fatima, shared how she had joined after retiring from her teaching job in Mombasa. Another, Alice, spoke about how hiking had helped her heal after losing her brother. As they entered the forest trail, dappled light fell through the trees, casting gentle shadows on the forest floor. The air smelled of wet earth and eucalyptus. Birds chirped high above, and the occasional monkey darted across the path. At first, Miriam kept to the back, listening more than speaking. But as the trail wound deeper into the forest, something inside her began to shift. Her breathing synchronized with her steps, and her shoulders relaxed. She found herself laughing at a joke Clara made about trying to hike in slippers once. The simplicity of nature, the rhythm of walking, the absence of any pressure, it all felt like medicine. Midway through the hike, they paused by a waterfall. The sound of rushing water was soothing, almost meditative. Clara turned to her. "First time hiking?" Miriam nodded. "First time doing anything like this in years." Clara smiled knowingly. "I was the same. I used to think life stopped after a certain age, but here we are." Miriam looked out at the water, letting the breeze brush against her face. For the first time since Daniel left, she wasn't thinking about the empty apartment or the long hours of silence. She was thinking about how good it felt to move, not just her body, but her soul. She smiled back at Clara. "I think I'll come again next week." A month passed in quiet transformation. Miriam began to look forward to Sundays, not as a way to pass time, but as a day of renewal. Each hike with the Silver Steps group brought new trails, new laughter, and an unfamiliar but welcome feeling of freedom. She had even begun walking to the library midweek to chat with Clara or sit quietly in the reading garden, leafing through novels and travel magazines. Her wardrobe, once defined by work blouses and house skirts, slowly made space for comfortable walking pants, sun hats, and a second pair of hiking shoes. She bought them with her own money, not from the savings account marked Daniel's tuition, and that, in itself, felt like an act of courage. One afternoon, after she had returned from the library, her laptop buzzed with a video call. Daniel's smiling face appeared on the screen. "Mama, you're glowing," he said immediately. She chuckled. "I am not." "You are," he insisted. "I can see it. And is that a new scarf?" "It is. I bought it from a vendor in Kiserian during a group trip last weekend. We visited the Olulua Nature Trail afterward." Daniel blinked, impressed. "You're turning into an adventurer." "I suppose I am," she said, a bit shyly. He looked genuinely happy. "I'm proud of you, Mama." His words warmed her more than he could know. She had never expected her life to widen again after he left, but somehow it had, like a flower opening to the sun after years of shade. Later that evening, Miriam journaled for the first time since her teenage years. Clara had given her the idea, saying it helped her track not just hikes, but emotions. Miriam wrote about the birds she had seen, the laughter shared, the way her knees had ached, but her spirit had soared. She also wrote something else, an admission that felt like a secret prayer. I am more than a mother. I am still becoming. When she closed the book, a peaceful silence settled around her. Not the heavy silence of loneliness, but the gentle stillness of someone finally at peace with her own company. It was early morning when the Silver Steps group gathered at the foothills of Ngong Hills, ready for their most challenging hike yet. The sun was barely over the horizon, casting a golden hue over the valleys below. Miriam stood near Clara and Fatima, sipping warm tea from a thermos, her heart beating with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. This one is no walk in Karura, Clara warned with a wink, tightening the strap of her backpack. But the view from the top? Worth every drop of sweat. Miriam nodded. She had been preparing for this all month, walking extra in the evenings, adjusting her diet, even doing light stretches in her sitting room. She wanted to prove to herself that she could do this, that she could climb higher, literally and figuratively. The group began their ascent slowly, the grassy slopes steeper than the city parks Miriam had grown used to. The sun rose higher as the trail wound upward, and soon beads of sweat formed along her brow. Her breath grew heavier, her calves ached, but she pressed on, step by step. When she reached the first ridge, she paused and turned around. Nairobi sprawled below, far in the distance, concrete and traffic now replaced by endless green, and a sky so wide it made her chest expand just to look at it. She took a long drink from her water bottle and smiled. I never imagined I'd be here, she whispered to herself. Clara caught up beside her. It's something, isn't it? It's everything, Miriam replied. When they finally reached the summit, the wind whipped gently across the ridge, tugging at scarves and jackets. The sky seemed to wrap around them. Miriam stood still, the world laid out beneath her, and for a moment she felt deeply connected. To nature, to these strangers who had become her people, and most importantly, to herself. The group took photos and shared snacks, laughter ringing across the highland breeze. Clara handed her a small granola bar and smiled. You made it. Miriam looked out at the view once more and said, I think I've only just begun. It became a tradition. After every hike, Miriam would send Daniel a photo and a short message. Sometimes it was a snapshot of a hidden waterfall. Other times it was the hiking group, grinning with sweaty satisfaction. Daniel responded faithfully, each time with admiration. One Sunday evening, after a particularly long forest walk in Kiambu, Miriam found an email waiting in her inbox titled, Letters from Your Son. She clicked it, expecting a short note, but what unfolded was something deeper. Mama, every time I see your messages, I feel proud, not just because you're hiking and trying new things, but because I can feel you changing. I know that's strange to say about your own parent, but it's true. Growing up, I always saw you as strong, but also as tired, like someone carrying a weight and refusing to rest. You never let yourself breathe. Now, when I see your pictures, I don't just see joy, I see rest, I see discovery. I see a woman becoming more than a mother, becoming herself. I want you to know that even when you felt alone raising me, I never felt alone. Your love was enough, more than enough. But now, it's your turn. Keep going. Keep climbing. Love, Daniel. Miriam read it twice, her eyes misting. She held the laptop against her chest, as if trying to absorb the words into her very skin. It was the kind of affirmation she didn't know she had needed. She replied simply, My dear son, thank you. You're right. I'm learning to breathe. That night, she took out her journal and filled 3 pages. She wrote about how Daniel's words reminded her of the depth of their bond, but also of the importance of carving her own path now. She wrote about her goals, learning to cook something new, maybe taking a short writing course at the library, and planning a trip with the hiking group to Lake Naivasha. Miriam didn't feel guilty anymore. She didn't feel afraid. She felt seen. And for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't living only for someone else. She was living with herself, fully. By late September, Nairobi's skies had begun to shift. Clouds thickened, and the evenings carried a whisper of rain. But Miriam's heart remained warm, even as the weather cooled. Her life now pulsed with quiet rhythm. Early morning walks, library visits, Silver Steps hikes, and long Sunday calls with Daniel. It wasn't a dramatic life, but it was hers. One Thursday afternoon, as she browsed the community board at the library, Clara approached her with an excited grin. "Miriam," she said, "we need someone to help coordinate our December trip to Naivasha. You're organized, thoughtful, and you've become part of the soul of this group. Would you consider it?" Miriam blinked. "Me? I've never planned anything like that." Clara nodded. "You've planned an entire life alone. This is just a weekend trip, and we'll help." It was said in jest, but the words hit home. For the first time, someone saw the resilience she had carried not just as struggle, but as skill, as a strength worth honoring. She agreed. Planning the trip became a joyful project, researching accommodation, organizing group transport, suggesting nearby nature trails. She discovered she liked managing details, liked seeing people light up when everything fell into place. It reminded her of the years she spent balancing work and Daniel's schooling, but this time it wasn't done in sacrifice. It was done in celebration. During one planning session, Fatima leaned in and said, "You have a gift for bringing people together. Have you ever thought of leading your own group one day?" Miriam smiled, not dismissing the idea. That evening, she sat on her small balcony with a steaming cup of chai. She watched the city lights flicker to life, their soft glows dancing in the reflection of a sky about to rain. She had come a long way from the still, sorrowful evenings after Daniel left. Her son was thriving. She was thriving. Not because life had filled back up with noise, but because she had found purpose in the silence. She had built new friendships, found joy in movement, and, perhaps most importantly, discovered she was never too old to begin again. December arrived with its usual burst of activity: holiday music in the supermarkets, traffic in every corner of Nairobi, and children playing loudly in apartment courtyards. But for Miriam, this December held a different kind of excitement. She stood at the waiting bay of the Nairobi terminus, her travel bag slung over her shoulder, a clipboard in hand. One by one, members of the Silver Steps group arrived, greeting her with hugs and banter. Clara gave her a thumbs up from across the platform, and Fatima carried a thermos of tea as usual. They were heading to Lake Naivasha, a trip Miriam had meticulously planned. It was her first time leading anything outside of home or work, and yet, as the train rumbled to life beneath her feet, she felt grounded, confident. Later that evening, after checking into the guest cottages and guiding the group through a lakeside walk, Miriam found a quiet spot by the water. The sun was setting in golden streaks across the horizon, flamingos stepping delicately along the banks. The moment was soft, sacred. Her phone buzzed with a video call. "Hi, Mama," Daniel's voice crackled through. She smiled. "Hi, my son. How are the exams?" "Brutal," he laughed. "But I'll survive. I saw the photos you shared. Naivasha looks amazing." "It's beautiful," she said, turning her phone to show the lake. "It reminds me that the world is so much bigger than I ever allowed myself to believe." Daniel paused. "Mama, you look different. Not just happier, lighter, like you found something." She nodded. "I think I've found me." He grinned. "That's the best thing you've ever done." They talked until the sky turned indigo, and Miriam promised to bring him something from the local market. After ending the call, she stood in the darkening dusk, the sound of crickets rising around her. She breathed in the fresh air and felt no ache, no anxiety, just peace. The woman who once sat alone in a quiet flat, unsure of her worth beyond motherhood, now stood at the edge of a lake, leading others, living fully, and dreaming anew. Tomorrow they'd hike Crescent Island. Next year maybe Mount Kenya. Her path had only just begun. Stories connect us to our past, shape our present, and guide our future. African Legends and Stories is more than just storytelling. It is a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow, between tradition and modernity. Subscribe now and be part of this journey. Like, comment, and share to keep these legends alive. This is African Legends and Stories, where the past speaks and the future listens.